So HMC says, then why was the West in the position to affect global South societies in the first place? Why didn't they industrialize first? So I guess that is so an argument worth exploring, because the first time that there was the first colonial encounter was pre-industrial revolution, right? Um, and it wasn't the first time that peoples in different cultures in different parts of the world met each other. Like the Chinese had the what do you call the Silk Road for centuries, and they had vast commercial empires as well. So there were several moments where different peoples that belonged to different epistemes, that belonged to different ways of doing things, came together, and they did not develop a colonial dynamic. So as of 1492, way before the Industrial Revolution, there is a special kind of like colonial dynamic that is born, where because of this idea, this conviction that the West is best, that the West is the has these set of ideas that will make society civilize, and there's therefore some sort of like civilizing mission attached to that, then there was an almost an inherent need to expand this like wonderful system that had been created that would then civilize these populations. There was almost like a self-appointed tutelage of populations that were quote unquote unable to fend for themselves because they were seen as inferior. But I mean, were the Aztecs and the Incas inferior to Spain in 1492? I mean, the amount of stuff that was working badly in Europe at that time, I don't see why you would need these like you need to abandon your culture to the point of what the Spanish did in Peru, for example. You need to grab all of these indigenous communities, strip them of their identity, mix them up in communal areas, reducciones, called reductions, so that they can be better managed by us. So cultural genocide, basically, right? So I'm not, uh, I'm not sure why that was necessary, other than by this like idea of, but we're better, right? The Aztecs had like more hygienic cities than the Spanish, but the Spanish were better because they had invented Christianity, right? Not invented, but they were expanding Christianity, right? There were entire debates about whether the indigenous populations of the Americas were actually, agents with a soul or not. So HMC says Europe was technologically very superior to the Aztecs. Sure, technologically superior in some ways, yes. In many ways, sure. That doesn't make them superior. That makes them technologically more advanced. That doesn't make them better. That doesn't make them normatively superior. That is something that you are adding to the mix here. Whether or not that justifies whatever Europeans did is another debate. No, it's the same debate. It's just doesn't justify it, right? But we're not talking about who was technologically superior or inferior. We're talking about why are you arguing that technological superiority makes you morally superior as well, makes you inherently better as well. You don't know that. There's a lot of stuff that European countries could have learned from Mesoamerican, North American, and South American ways of living. Sustainability, for example. And yet, like, you're dismissing that because you already know the result. The result is that the West is better. And this is something interesting because like it's not the first time. It's not a dynamic that exists only within Europe vis-a-vis other parts of the world. At several points in time, it has happened between European countries themselves. Like in World War I, the English and the Germans were very much debating amongst each other who was the true representative of Westernness, of Western civilization. And the English thought the Germans brutes, and the Germans thought the English were lazy slackers. So if the right way of doing things, if the right way of achieving development is to be the most Western you can be, then we should do that within the West as well. Who should rule the English? Who does West better than the English? The Germans? The Americans? I don't know. I mean, who has the higher life expectancy? Who has the better healthcare system? Who has the more technological advancements? Who does more microchips? I don't know. Let's put them all in a scale, and decide. Okay, we're gonna all decide that the Germans are the best Westerners. So everyone, please submit to the Germans now, so that they can rule the world. Because there's a scale, right? The more Western you are, the better. And so therefore we need to find that at the time of World War One, the English were the best Westerns, or the Germans were the best Westerns. So all the other Westerners should just fall in line and be ruled by the best Western. And then in 20 years' time, we will change. Maybe it'll be the Americans. So all the Westerns need to be ruled by the Americans. Why is that never considered? Why is it that the scale is all the Western states and then the rest? Why is it never that the scale is considered within the West? Even when it was, like, the Germans were actually literally saying that the French were bastardizing Western culture in the 1910s. So why is it that no one says, well, then the French should have accepted German superiority and be colonized by the Germans? Because you can't accept that, because that breaks the mold. So this argument that we need to place societies on a line of progress from least to most advanced, to more inferior to more superior, it's just a construct. It's built from myth. Because when the time came to actually put in practice this, like, quote unquote civilizing mission, this idea, this liberal empire that was going to make these barbarian communities better, that sort of never happened. Like, when you go from the 1600s, the 15 and 1600s, with the Spanish saying, like, oh, we're going to evangelize the indigenous people, we're going to make them better, we're going to civilize them. And then also, eventually the other European empires started saying the same thing, we're going to civilize them. That was a very universalist claim of, we can make humans better. Right? We can justify our empire in this civilizing mission. But the problem was that this so-called civilizing mission actually rested upon a very ununiversalizable idea that the way to be better is to be like the Westerners. So it's sort of like it created a double dynamic. On the one hand, this is what Dina Suvala, a Greek scholar, calls the logic of biology. You are biologically inferior. You're biologically a barbarian. You lack this idea of, you're unable to produce this idea of Westernness, of liberal values. But yet you are demanded, with a logic of improvement, to abandon who you are and embrace Western values so that you can better yourself. The logic of improvement and the logic of biology. And those two never match, they never meet in the middle. The non-Western community is never able to become fully Western. Like, no nation that has ever tried it has actually received full Western status during the Age of Empire. Abyssinia didn't do it. Japan didn't do it. That's why we ended up with World War II. It just never happened. No country during the Age of Empire that was non-Western actually received Western blessing and status, because there was something wrong with them, right? Quote unquote. There was something wrong with them. They were not Western. So this particular and universal contradiction at the heart of the rationality meant that the closer you get to the mid 1800s, the more the rationale stops being oh, there's a civilizing mission that we need to accomplish. There's a way for us to civilize these savages and make them better. The more time passed by, the less that logic made sense, and the more writers in the West started saying, you know what, these people are inherently incapable of developing the ideas of the West. They are barbarians. They're savage, and so therefore they are not. They cannot be improved. So they should be dominated by the superior entity. So the justifications of colonialism started to waddle and move away from we need to civilize these people so that we can improve them to actually, instead of liberal empire, we need to try some form of like liberal despotism. We need to contain these savages in the best way we can. Like there's a quote from John Stuart Mill that I actually marked here. I put it here. I think you can read this. Yeah, you can. So it says, as it is already common and is rapidly tending to become the universal condition of the more backward populations to be either held in direct subjugation by the more advanced or to be under their complete political ascendancy, there are in this stage of the world few more important problems than how to organize this rule so as to make it good instead of a good instead of an evil to the subject people, providing them with the best attainable present government and with the conditions most favorable to future permanent improvement. So this idea of civilizing stops becoming, oh, we can actually make you Western. We can actually logic of improvement you into becoming Western, and it becomes more like we need to govern you. We can give you good government. We can be better. We can put better institutions of government for you. So you need to like swallow your own identity and become part of me. Become part of the West. You need to accept my despotism. You need to accept the backward societies need to accept the ruling of the more advanced ones. So that's not liberal. That's not the social contract. That's not the idea that all men are created equal. That's not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of these liberal ideas that were designed for Europeans in the 16, 1700s were progressively abandoned in the global south, in the colonial world, creating what we know as the colonial difference. So there was no real civilizing mission. At the end, it became just power. So HMC says you don't have to resort to biological or racial essentialism. It's entirely possible to explain why one culture is behind another through nothing besides geographic influences and historical happenstance. I mean, the problem with the culture argument is that it is essentially just a placeholder for other descriptors, right? When you say it's not about race, I'm not a racist because I'm not saying that your race is inferior. I'm just saying that you are culturally inferior. Your culture is not there. That's exactly what defenders of colonialism did in the 1900s. They started off defending colonialism in ethical grounds. And there's a good book. Let me see if I can share the book with you. Hold on a second. So, Alibis of Empire is a book that argues something like what I'm saying. Like the way empire was first, I'm going to share in the chat. The way that empire was first justified was under a universal idea of we need to civilize the other. Right? It was an ethical claim. It's like we are better, therefore we can improve them and civilize them. But as let me see if I can put the that in the window here. As that didn't pan out, as it became impossible to just sugarcoat imperialism and argue what we're doing is civilizing you. We're not really exterminating you. We're actually doing you a favor. You should be thankful for that. The defense started to be, well, it is impossible to civilize these people, so they should be put under this benevolent dictatorship, of like the superior entity, the superior body. So, and it's like saying colonialism is a Ferrari, but really, you have a tank. So what do you do when you have a tank and you're calling it a Ferrari? Okay, you spray paint it in bright red and put a Ferrari symbol on top of it. And you say, see, it's a Ferrari. But you want to use it as a Ferrari and it just doesn't work as a Ferrari, it works as a tank. Right? So you sort of say, okay, fine, it'll be a tank. That's sort of what happened. It's like, no, we need to civilize you. We need to like make you better. But it never happened because the principles that applied to this idea of civilization is you are inherently inferior. You are of a lesser culture. You are of a lesser race. And there was no moment in time where the West looked at another culture and said, okay, now you're Western enough. Even societies that actively tried to mimic the West, like Japan, were not fully integrated into the conquerors of nations, the club of nations. So eventually the liberal mask falls and you get liberal despotism instead. And that's what basically all colonies devolved into, like just despotism with a liberal makeup. HMC says, then how do you explain Japan and Korea achieving honorary Western status in the second half of the 20th century? Well, for starters, we no longer have empire, right? um, the I guess this works against you really because the reason why we're able to even discuss in these terms is that for the past 40 years since the 50 years since the 70s, world order transitioned away from a notion of civilization and culture and into an idea of development. The World Bank, the IMF, the United Nations, so, engaged in the political process of decolonization and the establishment of institutions to foster development. And in abandoning this idea that there are inherently inferior cultures that cannot adapt to the concepts of the West, some cultures generated enough wealth to be incorporated into this capitalistic notion of what counts as being good in the world. And the problem with these like developed, developing, least developed, underdeveloped notions is that they sort of hide the racism behind these terms. This is why I don't like talking about the developing world. I talk about the global South. But the reason is because the racism still exists. It's just we've put something on top of it that says, well, we're not talking about inferior cultures. We're talking about, development and the liberal consensus and the World Bank, right? So because we've done that, yeah, then we can move beyond this like idea that this logic of biology and improvement. The problem is that people that think like you, HMC, are sort of like trying to lift that veil and say, no, actually, it is just pure culture. Japanese culture is better. Or Japanese culture is superior. So that's why they were able to be successful. They were able to embrace the superior culture of Western values. So in a way, it's more honest than the discourse of development, I guess, because I don't think that the standard of civilization ever went away. We just put a lot of makeup on it, and the social dynamics of the discourse of development worked in similar ways, but it did allow us to move beyond this idea of what you're saying. Giving Japan honorary Western status became possible under this discourse because racism became unpopular. Racism became you can no longer defend this on racist lines. So some countries needed to be able to make the jump. Let's say, particularly countries that embraced liberal capitalist values to a degree, because South Korea developed through nominal liberal values, but then also a lot of mafia bosses, crooks, petty capitalism. So it's not a pure discourse. So I guess your argument is working against you here, because it's not that then, but then empire wasn't bad because Japan is now honorary Western, quote unquote honorary Western. Well, yeah, because the discourse changed. The way we justify things changed. The way we explain things changed. And rather you are trying to bring us back into that time where, I guess more honestly than the World Bank, you're saying, no, actually colonialism is good and cultures can be inferior. And so let's do that instead of talking about development. So HMC says, how do you explain things like modern Japan, where this process of westernization, which was imposed on them by force, was completely successful and created a stable and affluent independent society? Because it wasn't, so the way Japan, quote unquote, modernized was through, sure, it was, there was involvement by the US ever since like the 1850s, but from very early on in the 1870s, before, say, the occupation of the U.S. by the occupation of Japan by the U.S. before World War II, Fukusawa Yukichi was already saying we need to embrace Westernness as a means not to be better. Like if you read Fukusawa Yukichi's study on civilizations, he didn't consider Western civilization to be better. He actually considered Western civilization to be warmongering, and therefore prone to colonizing other peoples. And so to avoid colonization, Japan needed to embrace Western culture so to avoid colonization. That was the reason why that process was peaceful. The reason why there was no resistance movement to that process was because the Japanese government itself was, fighting against the samurai that wanted to like maintain traditional values in Japan, and two, it was a process that was done almost in tandem. Like they said, modernize, and Japan said okay, whereas the West said to China modernize, and China went like no. What happened? The Opium Wars. What happened? The Century of Humiliation. So again, I'm not sure your example is working for you here. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like content like this and you would like to see more, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can also come to one of my live streams or join my Discord server. It's really great that you're here because we're really trying to grow this community and turn it into a space where we can all come together to discuss about international law and international relations. So really thank you for your support. Until next time.